The vanishing of Bryce Laspisa. A drive into the unknown. The mysterious disappearance of Bryce Laspisa. Year and location: August 30th, 2013, Castaic, California. Imagine this. A bright young man, 19-year-old Bryce Laspisa, is driving home to see his parents. But something feels off. He's acting strangely, calling his mom repeatedly, making odd stops along the way. Hours pass. Then, his car is found crashed, overturned near Castaic Lake. Bryce is nowhere to be found. No signs of struggle. No tracks leading away. Just gone. Was this a planned disappearance? Did he meet a tragic fate? Or is there something far more sinister lurking beneath the surface? This is the case of Bryce Laspisa, a mystery that has haunted investigators, family, and internet sleuths for over a decade. What led to that fateful moment will leave you speechless. Before we go further, make sure to subscribe, comment, and like if you love gripping true crime stories. A young man with a secret. Through Kim's eyes. Kim stared out the window, watching the rain pour down in sheets against the glass. It was late, but she couldn't sleep. The hum of the streetlights outside did little to ease the unease gnawing at her. Bryce had been different lately. It wasn't just the usual college stress. This was something deeper. Something that made her stomach churn every time she looked at him. She had tried to talk to him, but he always brushed her off with a distracted smile and a vague excuse. He'd always been a little reckless, a bit of a thrill seeker. But this was different. Lately, his impulsive decisions seemed darker, more dangerous. He was drinking heavily, mixing alcohol with his prescription drug, Vyvanse. At first, she thought it was just a phase, something college kids did to cope with the pressure of exams and relationships. But the more it went on, the more it started to feel like a slow descent into something far worse. The text messages from unknown numbers began to worry her, each one more cryptic than the last. "You can't run forever. They're watching. Time's running out." Kim tried to shake it off, telling herself it was just some prank. But when Bryce started acting distant, like he was constantly looking over his shoulder, she couldn't ignore the growing fear. It all came to a head one night when he looked at her with cold eyes and said, "You'll be better off without me." His voice was flat, emotionless. It was like he was speaking from a different reality, a place she couldn't follow. She had tried to laugh it off, told him he was being dramatic, but a knot formed in her chest. Was he breaking up with her? Or was there something worse behind those words? She should have pushed harder. She should have demanded answers. But the truth was, she hadn't wanted to face the truth. Something deep down told her that there was more to his behavior than just emotional turmoil. The first sign of trouble came when Bryce began acting erratically. There was the night he told her he had messed up, his voice shaky, filled with guilt, though he refused to elaborate. When he started giving away his belongings, his Xbox, some jewelry, and a few sentimental items, Kim's heart dropped. It felt like he was preparing for something he hadn't told her. But when she confronted him about it, he gave her that familiar smile, the one that didn't reach his eyes, and said, "I'm fine, Kim. I just want to focus on school." She didn't believe him. A few days later, Bryce made a strange decision. He withdrew a large sum of money from his bank account. When Kim asked him about it, he laughed it off and said he needed to pay off some things. But Kim knew that wasn't true. He had never been financially irresponsible, and he certainly wasn't the type to suddenly blow through a huge chunk of his savings. The whole thing felt off, like he was preparing to disappear. What was he planning? What was going on in his head? The last time she saw him, he kissed her on the cheek and promised he'd be back soon. But his words didn't hold the same comfort they once did. There was a coldness to his touch, a distance in his eyes, that made her feel as though she was already losing him. Kim was sitting on her bed, staring at her phone. The screen lit up with a call from Bryce. Her heart leaped into her throat. She answered it quickly, the panic rising in her chest. "Bryce, are you okay?" she asked, trying to mask the fear in her voice. For a moment, there was silence on the other end, and then his voice, shaky and distant, broke the silence. "I need to fix this, Kim. I messed up. I don't know if I can come back from this." What was he talking about? The words hung in the air, but she couldn't make sense of them. "Bryce, what's going on? Talk to me." I can't explain. I just need to fix this. I need to leave." A chill ran down her spine. "Leave? What do you mean, leave?" But he didn't answer. The line went dead. Kim's heart pounded in her chest. Her mind raced with questions. Was he planning to leave her? Was he going to run away? And why didn't he want to tell her what was going on? She tried calling him back, but there was no answer. The next morning, Kim was a bundle of nerves. She couldn't focus on anything, her thoughts constantly drifting back to Bryce. Had she done enough? Had she been there for him when he needed her most? Then the call came. A news report had just surfaced. Bryce's car had been found near Castaic Lake. The car was overturned, the back window shattered. But Bryce? He was nowhere to be found. Kim's heart sank into her stomach. She felt the ground beneath her shift. No, this couldn't be happening. Bryce gone? Her hands trembled as she read the report again. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no footprints. It was like he had simply vanished, as if he had walked into thin air. But Kim knew better than to believe in coincidences. Something was wrong. Something more than what was being told. She couldn't sit still. She needed to know what had happened. She needed answers. The police investigation uncovered something even more chilling. A few days before his disappearance, Bryce had made some strange phone calls. The last one was to a number that didn't belong to anyone in his family. The police couldn't trace it. It was as though it had disappeared into thin air. But that wasn't the most terrifying part. Kim received a letter. It was anonymous, written in jagged handwriting, and it had been slipped under her door while she slept. She opened it with trembling hands, the words inside sending a chill down her spine. "You don't know who you're dealing with, Kim. The truth is darker than you can imagine. Bryce is gone because he crossed a line. You're next if you don't stay out of it." Her breath caught in her throat. The letter was a threat. To her. Someone was watching her. Someone who knew everything about Bryce and about her. The question echoed in her mind. What had Bryce gotten involved in? Was it just a simple college mistake? Or had he become entangled in something far more dangerous? Kim didn't know who she could trust anymore. The more she dug into Bryce's past, the more she realized there were pieces missing. People he'd been hanging out with, places he'd been. All of it seemed to have vanished like smoke. And then there were the cryptic texts, the ones he'd received but never talked about. The anonymous threats. As the days turned into weeks, Kim's search for answers became an obsession. The police hadn't made any headway. They suspected Bryce had driven off on his own, but Kim didn't believe it. No way. Bryce wasn't the type to just walk away from everything. The more she thought about it, the more things didn't add up. Who was the person who had been sending him strange messages? What was this mess of financial problems, unexplained behavior, and the cryptic calls? And the most disturbing question of all, why did Bryce act like he was preparing to disappear? Kim's worst fears were becoming a terrifying reality. Bryce had been running. He wasn't just a college kid making mistakes. He was caught in something. Something that had cost him his life, and perhaps her safety too. Just when Kim thought things couldn't get worse, the unexpected happened. She received an unexpected call one night from an unknown number. She hesitated but answered. "Kim, it's Bryce." Her heart stopped. She could barely breathe. But then, The voice on the other end wasn't his. It was a man's voice, distorted. "Bryce is gone, Kim. But you'll find him. If you know where to look. You just have to open your eyes." And then, the line went dead. What did that mean? What did he know? And why had Bryce been mixed up in this dangerous game? Kim had to know the truth. Every second felt like an eternity as Kim pieced together the fragments of Bryce's life. And in doing so, discovered a world she never knew existed. A world of threats, lies, and hidden truths. What had Bryce gotten himself into? Was it too late to save him? Or was he already gone forever? The unanswered questions lingered in the air, leaving everyone, Kim, the police, the internet sleuths, wondering, what happened to Bryce Laspisa? Before we dive deeper into the mystery, make sure to subscribe, like, and comment on your thoughts below. Let's uncover the truth together. Stay tuned as we go deeper, where we unravel more secrets of this chilling case. The phone rang. Kim's breath caught in her throat as she saw the name flash across the screen. Detective Thomas. Her heart pounded, her hands clammy. Every day felt like a battle, each hour a step closer to something she couldn't bear to know. "Kim," the detective said, his voice tight with tension. "We've got a lead. I need you to come down to the station. It's urgent, urgent." Kim could feel the weight of the word press on her chest. She had been holding her breath, waiting for a break in the case, but the thought of learning the truth terrified her. What if they found something? What if it was something worse than she could imagine? When she arrived at the station, the air felt thicker than it ever had before. The fluorescent lights buzzed above her head as Detective Thomas led her into a small, sterile room. His eyes were guarded, and his lips pressed into a thin line. "Sit down," he said, motioning to the chair. Kim did as she was told, trying not to let the tremor in her hands show. "We've traced Bryce's movements after he left Buttonwillow. He made several stops along the way. We know he bought gas in 2 different places, both on the way to Castaic. But we've also found something you need to hear." Kim's heart raced. Was it a clue? Was it something that would explain where Bryce had gone? "The second gas station he stopped at," Detective Thomas continued. "The attendant remembers him clearly. Bryce was acting off. He wasn't himself. His eyes were darting around, like he was afraid someone was watching him." Kim swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. "Afraid of who?" she asked, the words coming out as barely a whisper. "We're not sure," the detective replied. "But what happened after that is the part that doesn't make sense." Kim's thoughts raced as she walked back to her car. What had Bryce been afraid of? He had always been a free spirit, someone who embraced adventure. But this was different. He hadn't just disappeared into the night. He had been running from something, someone. The thought gnawed at her. Could it be that someone had been following him? Had Bryce gotten involved in something that had put him in danger? What was it that Bryce hadn't told her? She remembered his strange behavior, the way he had seemed so distant in the days leading up to his disappearance. He had been hiding something, but what? Kim couldn't stop thinking about the crash site. She had seen the pictures, the overturned car, the broken window, the eerie silence that surrounded it. No blood, no sign of struggle. Nothing. It was as if Bryce had simply disappeared into thin air. But the more she thought about it, the more questions kept popping up. Why had Bryce stopped there? Castaic Lake wasn't exactly a place people visited at night. There were no signs of him trying to escape. No footprints, no trace of where he had gone. Kim couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister had taken place at that spot. And yet, she couldn't make sense of it. Why was Bryce there? What had led him to that remote location? And more importantly, who had been waiting for him? It wasn't long before Kim began receiving more disturbing messages. The first one came a week after Bryce's disappearance. The message was short, cryptic, and chilling. "He knew too much. Now he's gone. You'll be next." She had no idea who it was from, but it shook her to the core. Kim had tried to report it to the police, but they couldn't trace the number. It was like someone had deliberately erased their digital footprints. The feeling of being watched began to consume her. She couldn't go anywhere without feeling like someone was following her, lurking in the shadows. Even at night, she could sense it, the feeling that she wasn't alone. She had tried to brush it off, telling herself it was just the stress getting to her. But the messages kept coming. One day, a call came in that made her blood run cold. It was from a blocked number, but the voice on the other end was unmistakable. "Kim, it's Bryce." Her heart nearly stopped. She froze, the phone clutched in her trembling hand. "Bryce? Is it really you? Where are you?" Her voice cracked, desperation leaking through the cracks in her calm exterior. But the voice that answered was not the Bryce she knew. It was distorted, a deep, mechanical tone that sent shivers down her spine. "Bryce is gone. I'm the one who took him. And now, you're part of this too." Kim's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to scream, to hang up, but she couldn't. The voice on the other end continued, cold and unnerving. "Leave it alone, Kim. You're in too deep now. If you keep digging, you'll end up like him. Dead." The line went dead before she could respond. Kim stood there, her legs weak beneath her, as the truth began to sink in. Bryce wasn't just missing. Someone had taken him. And now, they were coming for her too. The more Kim looked into Bryce's life, the darker it became. She began digging into his financial records, his phone calls, his emails, anything that might reveal the truth. What she found terrified her. Bryce had been involved in something he hadn't told her about. There were payments made to unknown people, coded messages, and a string of suspicious contacts. At first, Kim thought it might have been some sort of mistake. But the more she uncovered, the clearer it became. Bryce had been in over his head. Had he been blackmailed? Was that why he had seemed so anxious and scared in the days before his disappearance? Kim couldn't stop herself. She had to know what had happened. She dug deeper, reaching out to people from Bryce's past, people he'd known in high school and college. What she discovered made her stomach churn. There was a man, an older man named Marcus. He had been a friend of Bryce's father, and had allegedly helped Bryce with some financial matters. But as Kim spoke to more and more people, she learned that Marcus had a reputation, a dangerous one. He was known for being involved in shady dealings, things that didn't belong in the daylight. Was this why Bryce had been so desperate? Had Marcus pulled him into something he couldn't escape? Kim was sitting in her apartment one evening when another message arrived. It was from the same anonymous number. "You're getting too close, Kim. Stop digging. You don't want to know what happens next." Kim's blood ran cold. She couldn't stop now. She had to finish what Bryce had started. But as she stared at the message, a terrifying thought crossed her mind. What if Bryce hadn't just been running away? What if he had been trying to warn her? What if everything he had done, everything he had said, was part of a bigger plan? A plan to save her? And what if it was already too late? Kim wasn't sure how long she had been walking. The city streets stretched out in front of her, the buildings looming like silent witnesses to the night's horrors. She was trying to follow the clues, trying to make sense of everything. But the deeper she went, the more elusive the answers became. A sudden sound behind her snapped her back to reality. She turned, her heart hammering in her chest. Footsteps. She could hear them. Slow, deliberate, echoing through the empty streets. She quickened her pace, the fear gnawing at her insides. Who was following her? Was it someone who knew what she was doing? Was it the same person who had taken Bryce? The footsteps grew louder, closer. Kim's breath hitched. She turned a corner, trying to lose whoever it was, but the footsteps never stopped. And then she saw him. A man, standing in the shadows. his face obscured by a hood. His figure was tall and imposing. But before Kim could move, he stepped forward. "You're getting too close, Kim," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Fear gripped her heart. Was this the end? Had she gone too far? Before she could respond, the man turned and vanished into the darkness, leaving her trembling, more uncertain than ever about the truth behind Bryce's disappearance. The questions that had been plaguing Kim for weeks now seemed even more urgent. Who was Marcus, and what role did he play in this? Was Bryce just a pawn in a much larger game? Every answer she uncovered seemed to raise more questions. Was Bryce still out there? Or had he been silenced? And if so, why? The truth was becoming harder to grasp, slipping through her fingers like sand. But one thing was certain. She couldn't stop now. No matter what. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe, comment, and let me know what you think. What do you believe happened to Bryce Laspisa? Who is behind his disappearance? Stay tuned for more chilling twists and turns in this gripping case. It had been weeks since Bryce disappeared, and each day felt like a lifetime. The detective calls were infrequent, and the tips were almost always dead ends. Kim's life had become a cycle of waking up in a cold sweat, rushing to the phone to check for new messages, then spending the rest of her day spiraling into the abyss of unanswered questions. But that night, everything changed. It was a Saturday, the middle of September, and Kim hadn't slept properly for days. The messages from the unknown number had become relentless, sometimes multiple times a day, each one more cryptic than the last. "He never should have crossed us. You're next." Kim had tried to block the number, but it kept coming through from new lines, the messages chilling in their clarity, their knowing tone. They were watching her. They knew everything. They were never far from her. And neither was the fear. It was nearing midnight when the call came. Kim was alone in her apartment. She had spent the entire evening in the dark, scrolling through Bryce's social media accounts, trying to find any trace of the person who had last spoken to him. She couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened after his car was found near Castaic Lake. Her phone buzzed. It was a blocked number. Her heart skipped a beat. Could this be another message from the same anonymous person who had been haunting her for weeks? She hesitated, fingers trembling, but eventually picked up the phone. "Hello?" There was a long pause, so long that Kim was sure she was talking to nothing but static. Then a voice, deep, distorted, and almost mechanical, cut through the silence. "You're getting closer, Kim. Too close." Kim's breath hitched. The voice sounded familiar, yet strange, as if it had been distorted to keep her from recognizing it. "What do you want from me?" she whispered, the words barely leaving her lips. Her chest tightened, and for a moment she felt her legs wobble beneath her. What happened to Bryce? But the voice only laughed low and hollow. "It's not about Bryce anymore," the voice said. "You've opened a door that should have stayed closed. You're in danger now, Kim. Leave this alone, or the next time we talk, you won't recognize the voice on the other end." Kim's blood ran cold as the line went dead. Sleep didn't come easy for Kim that night. The shadows in her apartment seemed to grow longer and darker. The walls felt as if they were closing in on her. And no matter how much she tried to shake off the fear, it stuck with her like a thick fog. The nightmare came in waves, silent at first, but soon engulfing her completely. In the dream, she was standing alone at Castaic Lake, staring at the same spot where Bryce's car had been found. The air was thick with mist, and she could barely make out the shape of the car in the distance, its shattered windows reflecting the pale moonlight. Kim stepped forward, her heart pounding with each footstep. She called out Bryce's name, but the only response was the haunting echo of her own voice. "Bryce," she whispered again. But this time, the voice didn't sound like hers. It sounded wrong. Kim froze, staring into the darkness, but no one was there. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw something, something small and red, flashing just beneath the surface of the water. It was Bryce's red baseball cap, the one he always wore when they went on hikes together. Before she could move, the water erupted. A hand shot out of the lake, dragging the cap down with it. The water began to churn violently, as if something or someone was trying to rise to the surface. Kim took a step back, her heart racing, but as she did, she felt something cold and clammy grip her ankle. She gasped, looking down to see dark, skeletal fingers wrapping around her leg, pulling her closer to the water. The more she struggled, the tighter they became. "Bryce!" she screamed, but no sound came out. Her chest tightened as the lake began to swallow her whole, her body sinking deeper and deeper into the abyss. She gasped for air, but the cold water filled her lungs. The fingers tightened their grip, dragging her under. And just as she thought she would drown, a voice whispered in her ear, so close, so chilling, "You were never meant to find him." Kim woke up with a violent jolt, gasping for air. Her heart was hammering in her chest, and the fear felt so real, so overwhelming, that she could still hear the water lapping at her ears. Sweat dripped from her brow, and her legs trembled as she sat up in bed, disoriented, trying to make sense of the nightmare. "You were never meant to find him," the words echoed in her mind. Was it just a dream, or had it been a warning? Kim couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for her at Castaic Lake, that it was more than just a place where Bryce's car had been found. It had become a symbol of something darker, something that had been calling her since Bryce's disappearance. The next day, she couldn't resist the urge. She packed a bag and drove to the lake, determined to uncover whatever truth had been hidden there. It was early in the morning when Kim arrived at Castaic Lake. The sun was barely rising, casting an eerie orange glow over the water. The lake, once so serene and peaceful in her memories, now felt like a cold, dead place. It was as if the land itself was holding its breath. Kim's eyes scanned the shore, but the silence was suffocating. She could hear nothing but the wind rustling through the trees. Her footsteps felt too loud, too intrusive. She approached the area where Bryce's car had been found, her heart pounding with every step. Suddenly, a voice behind her froze her in her tracks. "You shouldn't be here." Kim spun around, her breath catching in her throat. A man stood behind her, tall and lean, his face hidden in the shadows of a hood. His eyes glinted in the early morning light, sharp and calculating. "Who are you?" Kim demanded, her voice shaky. "What do you want?" The man took a step forward, his presence so overwhelming that Kim took an instinctive step back. "I told you," he said coldly. "You're getting too close. Leave now. It's not safe for you here." Kim's heart raced. She was about to turn and run when the man's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist with terrifying force. "No," he whispered, his breath cold against her skin. "You're not going anywhere." For a split second, Kim was frozen in fear. Who was this man? And why did he look like he knew everything? "Tell me what happened to Bryce," she demanded, pulling against his grip. But the man only smiled, a twisted, knowing smile that sent chills down her spine. "You're digging in the wrong place, Kim," he said, his voice low and almost comforting, as if warning her of something greater. "You've been warned. You'll never understand what really happened. Bryce was part of something bigger than you can imagine." The man released her wrist and turned to walk away, but Kim couldn't move. As he disappeared into the mist, Kim was left standing there, feeling more lost than ever before. That night, as Kim lay awake, thoughts of the mysterious man, the nightmare, and the eerie warning continued to plague her. What had Bryce been involved in? What had he known that she didn't? The sense of dread weighed on her, growing with each passing minute. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her from her thoughts. It was another message from the unknown number. "You're too late, Kim. You'll never find him." She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to keep the tears at bay. Bryce had known something. But what? Was it too late for her to uncover the truth? Or had she already crossed a line that would change her life forever? Before we go further, subscribe, like, and leave your comments below. What do you think is really going on? Who is the mysterious man? Could Bryce have been involved in something far darker than anyone realized? Let me know your thoughts. The weight of the uncertainty never lifted. As each day passed, the anxiety grew stronger, more suffocating. Kim found herself waking up at 3 a.m., staring at the clock with wide, bloodshot eyes. The same thoughts replayed in her mind over and over, like a broken record that couldn't stop. Every new lead, every fresh theory, only seemed to deepen the abyss, pulling her into a spiral of confusion and dread. Bryce had been missing for weeks now. The police had done their part, investigating leads, but they had come up with nothing. No body, no concrete evidence, not a single solid explanation for what had happened to him. But Kim couldn't accept that. She couldn't accept that her boyfriend, the boy she loved, had simply vanished without a trace. Not like this. Not so easily. She refused to believe that the story had already been told and closed. There had to be more, and if there was, she would find it, no matter the cost. It was a rainy Tuesday when Kim sat in front of her laptop, her eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep, the skin under her eyes puffy from hours of crying. She'd spent the last 2 days on forums, reading theory after theory from strangers who had no connection to Bryce, who had no idea what he'd been through. But their words, no matter how crazy or baseless, somehow felt more comforting than the silence that haunted her own thoughts. At least they were doing something. At least they were trying to help. Each theory felt like a piece of a puzzle she couldn't put together. The first theory that haunted Kim was the idea that Bryce had taken his own life. It made her sick to her stomach to even think about it. She'd spent hours staring at the screen, reading about other people who had met a similar fate. Young men and women who, like Bryce, had struggled with depression or mental illness. But Bryce wasn't like that. He wasn't the type of person who would just give up. He'd been struggling, yes. The violence, the drinking, the erratic behavior. But he was a fighter. He'd always been a fighter. The night he'd disappeared, he'd seemed lost, yes, but not suicidal. There had been no signs, no goodbye notes, no social media posts that screamed, "I'm done." Kim couldn't accept the idea that Bryce, the person she had known and loved, would have taken his life in such a way. But what if she was wrong? Kim replayed the conversations in her head. The quiet moments when Bryce had said, "You'll be better off without me." The way he had given away his Xbox and his favorite pieces of jewelry. Could those have been signs? Was she too blind to see it? Was it possible that Bryce had been suffering more than anyone realized, hiding the truth from her, from everyone? The thought made Kim's stomach churn with guilt. Could she have done more? Should she have noticed? Should she have said something sooner? The more she thought about it, the worse it got. She could barely breathe. If Bryce had indeed taken his own life, what could Kim possibly do about it now? How could she come to terms with that? The grief would be unbearable. But what if the truth was worse than that? The second theory was one that Kim couldn't quite swallow, but it kept haunting her anyway. Could Bryce have planned to disappear? Could he have made a conscious decision to leave everything behind, to start a new life away from the pressures of his old one? She thought back to the months leading up to his disappearance, the constant shifts in his mood, the late-night phone calls, the strange behavior. Could there have been something deeper going on? Something that Kim had missed? Had Bryce been hiding a secret life? Something that made him want to vanish from the world, from everyone who loved him? The thought made her blood run cold. If Bryce had truly wanted to escape, why had he left his car behind? Why had he left his belongings in the wreckage? If he was trying to disappear, why hadn't he taken anything with him? No money, no clothes, no identification? Kim couldn't understand it. If Bryce had been planning to run away, he wouldn't have left such obvious clues behind. It didn't add up. It didn't make sense. But there was one chilling possibility that Kim couldn't shake. What if Bryce had been in such a fragile state, so emotionally overwhelmed, that he had snapped and made a decision he couldn't undo? Could he have chosen to disappear to escape the pressure? To escape the people who loved him? The thought was almost too much for Kim to bear. The third theory was the one that kept Kim up at night. The one that made her feel like something dark and sinister was watching her, lurking just outside of her view. What if someone had taken Bryce? What if he hadn't been in control of his fate that night? The idea of foul play felt so much worse than the others. It felt like a personal violation, as if someone had stolen Bryce from her, from his family, from the world. Kim couldn't shake the image of the wrecked car, found abandoned at the side of the road. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no obvious injuries on Bryce's body. But he was gone. No one had seen him leave. No one had heard anything. His phone had been left behind. His keys were gone. It didn't make sense. Was Bryce taken by someone? Was he lured into a trap? What if the person who took him was someone Bryce trusted? Someone he thought was a friend? What if Bryce had made a mistake, a fatal mistake, and ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time? The possibility that someone was involved, someone who knew exactly where Bryce was headed, who was watching him, sent a chill down Kim's spine. Was Bryce taken as part of something larger than anyone realized? A personal vendetta? A criminal plot? Could he have been involved in something that led to his capture? Something darker than anyone had expected? The final theory, and the one that made Kim's heart ache the most, was the possibility that Bryce had experienced a mental breakdown. The mix of violence and alcohol could have triggered something inside of him, something he couldn't control. Maybe he wasn't just acting erratically. Maybe he had slipped into a state of complete confusion, unable to distinguish between reality and delusion. Kim thought back to that day when Bryce had been sitting in his car for hours, refusing to leave. She had begged him to come home, to call his parents, but he hadn't listened. It was as if he had been in a trance. The phone call to his mom had been distant, as if he hadn't been fully present. Could Bryce have been in such a fragile state that he wandered off, lost in his mind, not knowing where he was or what he was doing? Was it possible that Bryce had suffered a breakdown, one so severe that he had wandered into the wilderness, confused and lost, unable to find his way back? The thought tore at Kim's heart. She had seen Bryce at his most vulnerable. But this was different. If he had been in that much pain, why hadn't he told her? Why hadn't he trusted her enough to reach out? Could he still be out there, somewhere, lost to the world, wandering without direction? As the days turned into weeks, the theories began to haunt Kim like ghosts. She felt like she was drowning in them, unable to break free from the swirling mass of possibilities. Each theory raised more questions than answers. What was the truth? Had Bryce really planned his own disappearance? Or had someone taken him? Was he lost somewhere in the wilderness, suffering from a mental breakdown? Or had he been taken by someone who knew exactly where to find him? Kim didn't know what to believe anymore. All she knew was that she couldn't stop searching. She couldn't stop wondering. What if I had known more? What if I could have stopped this? The pain was unbearable, and yet it was a pain she couldn't escape. Bryce had been more than a boyfriend. He had been her everything. She wasn't ready to let go. She wasn't ready to accept the idea that he was gone, and that no matter how much she searched, no matter how many nights she stayed up crying, she might never find him. But there was still hope. There had to be. Somewhere, deep inside, Kim clung to the belief that the truth was out there. She had to keep looking. For Bryce. For herself. For the answers. Before we go further, make sure to subscribe, like, and leave your comments below. What do you think really happened to Bryce? Was it suicide, a voluntary disappearance, foul play? or something else entirely? Let me know your thoughts, and let's continue this journey together.